Welcome, dear listener. Settle in, lower the lights, and let the world grow quiet. Tonight's mystery unfolds in shadows, sound, and secrets, best heard after midnight. This is Hercule Mysteries, and you're listening to Footsteps After the Final Chime. Chapter 1, The Midnight Broadcast. The city had a way of changing its breath after midnight. By day, it was a creature of noise, tram bells, hurried footsteps, doors slamming shut. But once the clocks crept toward 12, once the last cafe chair was stacked and the final cigarette crushed beneath a heel, the city exhaled, streets emptied, windows darkened, sound itself seemed to hesitate before daring to exist. It was during that pause between one day and the next that the broadcast began. At exactly 11:59 p.m., the radio station WXCR was airing its usual overnight program, soft orchestral music meant for insomniacs, taxi drivers, and lonely souls who found comfort in voices they would never meet. The host, a man with a calm baritone and a habit of speaking as though he were confiding secrets, introduced the final piece of the night. "And now," he said gently, "as the clock prepares to turn, we leave you with something timeless." The record crackled, violins swelled, then, without warning, the music dissolved into static. A sharp, violent hiss burst through the speakers, loud enough to make listeners flinch. The orchestra vanished, replaced by an uneven rhythm, like breath struggling through clenched teeth, and then came the sound. Footsteps, slow, measured, echoing. They were unmistakable, not shuffled, not hurried. Each step landed with deliberate intent, as though the walker wanted to be heard. The echo suggested a narrow corridor, perhaps tiled or wooden, where sound bounced back faithfully. Listeners leaned closer to their radios. Some thought it was a prank. Others waited for the host to return to apologize for a technical failure. But instead, a voice emerged, low, distorted, filtered, through layers of interference. "Do you hear them?" The footsteps stopped. Silence followed. A thick, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch far longer than it actually did. Then, chime, a single, resonant clock chime rang out, deep, metallic, final. Immediately after it faded, the footsteps resumed. One step, 2, 3, then the voice returned. "They only begin after the final chime." The broadcast cut abruptly to dead air. No closing music, no station identification, just silence. Across the city, radios hummed softly, waiting for something, anything, to follow. But nothing did. At 12:01 a.m., WXCR returned to its scheduled programming as if nothing had happened. Yet by then the damage was done. The first call came in at 12:07 a.m. The caller refused to give his name. "I think," he said, his voice thin and shaking, "that broadcast was meant for me." The night producer tried to calm him, explaining that radio glitches happened, that sometimes old recordings bled into the system. "No," the man whispered, "you don't understand. I hear them too." "Hear what, sir?" "The footsteps," he replied. "Every night, after midnight." The line went dead. By morning, the station manager had received over 30 letters, dozens of phone messages, and one handwritten note slipped under the studio door. The note contained only 4 words: "They are getting closer." It was this note that eventually found its way into the hands of Hercule Poirot. Poirot disliked mornings. He tolerated them out of necessity, but his mind functioned best when the world was quiet, when distractions fell away and the little grey cells could arrange themselves neatly. He was seated in his favorite armchair when the letter was delivered, brought by an old acquaintance who owed Poirot more than one favor and fewer explanations. Poirot examined the paper first, the texture, the edges, the pressure of the pen. "No signature," Poirot murmured. "How rude." "You think it's a hoax?" the man asked. Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he listened, to the room, to the distant sounds outside, to the rhythm of the city now fully awake. "Hoaxes," Poirot said at last, "seek attention. This seeks understanding." He folded the note carefully. "And I suspect," he added, "that someone is afraid of what happens after the final chime." The building from which the broadcast originated stood on a quiet street, unremarkable by design, a place people passed without noticing, which Poirot found deeply suspicious. Inside, the air smelled of dust, warm metal, and stale coffee. Poirot requested to hear the recording. "There is no recording," the station manager said, pale and defensive. "That's the strange part. The system shows nothing, no interruption, no anomaly. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yet the listeners heard something, he said softly. And listeners, my friend, do not imagine the same nightmare at the same time. They led him to the main studio. The radio console sat silently, innocent in appearance. Dials gleamed, needles rested peacefully. Poirot ran a finger along the edge of the desk. Tell me, he said, has anyone else been using your frequencies at night? The manager hesitated. There was an old auxiliary line, he admitted, from before modernization, supposedly decommissioned. Supposedly, Poirot repeated. That night, Poirot insisted on staying. At 11:55 p.m., the studio lights were dimmed. Only a single lamp remained on, casting long shadows across the walls. The city outside seemed to hold its breath once more. Poirot sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes closed, not in sleep, but in concentration. The seconds crawled. 11:59 p.m. Static crept into the speakers like a living thing. Poirot's eyes opened. Footsteps echoed through the studio monitors. Not loud, not threatening, but intentional. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, he whispered. You wish to be heard. The voice returned, clearer now. Do you hear them? Poirot leaned forward. Yes, he said aloud, though no one was speaking to him directly. And soon, my mysterious friend, I shall hear you as well. The clock on the wall lifted its hammer. Chime. The footsteps resumed, closer this time, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the studio walls, something or someone listened back. Chapter 2, Footsteps in the Hall. Welcome back, dear listener. If you are hearing my voice in the quiet of your room, if the world outside has gone still and the shadows have started to look a little too patient, then you already understand the first rule of a radio mystery. The most dangerous things do not announce themselves. They arrive softly, like a sound you can't explain, like footsteps you can't place. And on the night after the broadcast, the footsteps returned, not on the airwaves this time, in a house. It was 9:12 p.m. when the call came in, to Poirot's hotel. Not the grand kind of hotel with marble columns and sweet-smelling flowers in crystal vases, no. Poirot preferred places that were neat, quiet, and predictable. He despised surprises, even small ones. This was not small. The concierge knocked twice, then entered with the careful expression of a man holding a bad omen. A telephone call for you, Monsieur Poirot, he said. The gentleman says it is urgent. Poirot's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. At this hour, he asked. Urgency is usually a sign of poor planning. The concierge did not smile. He insists. He says it concerns the midnight chime. Poirot stood. His chair made a soft complaint against the carpet as he moved. He adjusted his tie, perfectly centered, as always, and crossed the room to the telephone. Oui, he said. Hercule Poirot speaking. For a moment, there was only breathing, thin, uneven, like someone who had been running or crying, or both. Then a man's voice, quiet but strained, spoke. Monsieur Poirot, I was told you would listen. Poirot's gaze sharpened. That depends, he replied, on whether you are going to speak the truth. A small sound escaped the man, half laugh, half sob. I don't know what the truth is anymore, he whispered. Only what I hear. And what do you hear? The line crackled softly. Footsteps, the man said, in my hall. Poirot's fingers tightened on the receiver. How long have you heard them? 3 nights, he answered. Always after midnight. Always after the final chime. I thought it was my mind. I thought it was guilt. But then I heard the broadcast. Poirot closed his eyes for a second, the way he did when arranging facts inside his head. You recognize something, he said. Yes, the man whispered. The sound, the echo. It is the same hall, the same steps, the same intention. Poirot's voice remained calm, but a new firmness entered it. Tell me your name. Another pause. Edwin Hargrove, the man finally said. I live at 19 Marroway Crescent. Poirot looked to the window. Outside, the city was beginning to dim, the street lamps blinking to life like watchful eyes. And you are alone in this house, Monsieur Hargrove. No, Edwin said, and his voice trembled with the weight of what came next. Not any more. Poirot waited. Edwin swallowed audibly. My sister is here. Alive? Poirot asked plainly, a sharp breath. I don't know. Poirot did not react the way most people would. No gasp, no soft reassurance. Just a slow inhale, like a man smelling smoke before seeing fire. Listen to me, Monsieur Hargrove, Poirot said. You will not hang up. You will keep your doors locked. You will do nothing foolish, and you will tell me exactly what happened. Edwin Hargrove's story came out in fragments like a radio transmission struggling through interference. His sister, Lydia Hargrove, had arrived unexpectedly a week ago. She had not written, had not called. She had simply appeared at his doorstep, pale, shaking, and carrying a small leather bag. She said she needed to stay for a few nights, Edwin explained. She said she was frightened. Of what? She wouldn't say, Edwin murmured. Only that someone was watching her, someone who knew about the chimes. Poirot's eyes flicked to the clock on his wall. It was not midnight, but it would be. And then, Poirot urged. Edwin's voice lowered. The first night she woke me, she said she heard walking. Poirot pictured it instantly, an old house, a hallway too long, darkness folded neatly at the corners. I went out, Edwin continued. I checked the hall, nothing. I checked the locks, nothing, but the air felt wrong, like someone had just left. Poirot spoke gently now, like a man guiding a frightened child across ice. And the second night, Edwin hesitated, we heard it together, clear as day. Footsteps, slow, heavy, starting right after the clock chimed midnight. Poirot's voice sharpened. And the third night, Edwin's breath hitched. The third night, he whispered. She vanished. Poirot was silent. Edwin filled the silence with panic. I searched everywhere, the cellar, the attic, the garden. I called her name until my throat hurt. There was no sign she'd left. The front door was locked, the windows latched, but she was gone. Poirot's face remained composed, but his mind was already building its structure, facts placed like chess pieces, each one waiting for its move. And last night, Edwin said, voice cracking, I heard the footsteps again. Without your sister. Yes, Edwin whispered. And this morning, I found something. Poirot leaned forward. Her note, Edwin said. On the hall runner, like it had been dropped. It was torn, but I could read it. What did it say? Edwin swallowed hard. After the final chime, do not follow. Poirot's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to fall. This is not madness, Poirot said quietly. This is design. Edwin's voice rose in desperation. Then what do I do? What do I do, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's reply was immediate. You do not follow the sound, he said, and you do not spend another midnight alone. Edwin exhaled. You'll come? I will come, Poirot said, but you must do exactly as I say. Yes, anything. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You will leave the hall exactly as it is, Poirot instructed. Do not move anything, do not clean, do not touch the runner. The footsteps, mon ami, they are not only a sound, they are a message, and messages leave traces. Edwin's voice trembled. And if I hear them tonight, Poirot's tone became iron. Then you will listen, said. You will listen carefully, and you will remember every detail, the pace, the weight, the direction, where the sound begins, where it ends. Edwin whispered. They end at my sister's door, Poirot froze. The footsteps, Edwin clarified, barely audible. They stop outside her room. Poirot's mind tightened around that single sentence. A door, a destination, a ritual. Do you sleep with your door locked? Poirot asked. Yes, Edwin said, since she vanished. Good, Poirot replied. Tonight you will do so again. Poirot's gaze flicked once more to the clock. Because, Monsieur Hargrove, he said softly, whoever is making those footsteps wants one thing. Edwin breathed. What? Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper, as if he feared being overheard even through the wire. To see if you will break. Marroway Crescent was the kind of street that made secrets comfortable. The houses were tall, narrow, and old, built in an era when architects believed in corridors, heavy doors, and rooms that swallowed sound. The trees along the sidewalk were bare this time of year, their branches like black fingers reaching toward the windows. Poirot arrived at 10:20 p.m. He carried no weapon. Poirot hated weapons. He carried instead what he trusted most: observation, logic, and patience. Edwin Hargrove met him at the door. He was younger than Poirot expected, early 30s perhaps. But his face had the exhausted look of a man who had not slept in days. His hair was uncombed, his shirt collar creased, his eyes red around the edges. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice shaking with relief. "Thank God." Poirot stepped inside and immediately noticed three things. 1. The air smelled faintly of lavender, a woman's scent, recent. 2. The hallway runner rug was slightly misaligned, as if it had been shifted by hurried feet. 3. There was a wall clock in the hall, tall, antique, its pendulum swinging with a slow, hypnotic confidence. Poirot placed his gloves on a small side table with great care. "Show me the hall," he said. Edwin nodded quickly and led him forward. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, lined with framed portraits that watched silently. The floorboards beneath the runner would creak if stepped on, but the runner itself muffled sound. Poirot crouched and examined the rug. There were faint marks on it, scuffs, barely visible, but not random. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "These are not made by ordinary walking," he murmured. Edwin swallowed. "What do you mean?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood and looked toward the staircase. The shadows beneath it were darker than the rest of the hall, as if the house itself collected gloom there. "Where is your sister's room?" Poirot asked. Edwin pointed. "The second door on the left." Poirot walked to it. He did not open it. He simply placed his fingers lightly against the wood, as if listening through touch. "And your room?" Poirot asked. "Opposite," Edwin said. "Across the hall." Poirot turned slowly, absorbing the geometry of the space like a man reading a map. Then he spoke, calm but exact. "Tonight we do not chase the footsteps," he said. "We allow them to perform." Edwin licked his dry lips. "And if they come to my door," Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet determination, "then we shall see," he said, "what follows the final chime." The house settled around them as midnight approached. The lamps were dim, the curtains drawn. Outside, a wind drifted down Marroway Crescent, rustling the bare branches in a way that sounded too much like whispering. Poirot sat in the sitting room with a notebook. Edwin paced, unable to sit still, stopping every few steps to stare at the hall, as if expecting it to open its mouth and swallow him. Poirot watched him with mild disapproval. "My friend," Poirot said, "your fear is very noisy." Edwin stopped. "How can I not be afraid?" Poirot's voice softened slightly. "Because fear," he said, "is the instrument of the one who plays this game." Edwin's voice cracked. "You think someone is doing it on purpose?" Poirot's reply was simple. "We." The clock in the hall ticked. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt like a footstep of its own. At 11:59 p.m. the air changed. Edwin froze mid-breath. Poirot's head tilted slightly, like a man listening for a distant violin. Then the clock's mechanism tightened. The house seemed to hold its breath. Chime, deep, metallic, final. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Edwin's mouth opened to speak, but no sound came, because in the hallway a soft sound began. Not the creak of boards, not the rustle of fabric, but the unmistakable deliberate rhythm of walking. 1 step, 2, 3, and the footsteps were moving toward Lydia Hargrove's door. Chapter 3. The Room That Would Not Answer If You Are. Listening late, if the clock nearby has begun to sound louder than it should, then you already know this truth. A closed door is never silent. It listens, and sometimes it waits. The footsteps stopped outside Lydia Hargrove's door. Not faded, not drifted away, stopped. Edwin's breath caught in his throat, his fingers dug into the arm of the chair, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on the dark mouth of the hallway. He did not dare blink. He did not dare breathe too loudly. He was suddenly, acutely aware of every sound his own body made. The faint whistle of air through his nose, the dry click of his tongue against his teeth. Poirot remained seated, still as porcelain. Only his eyes moved. They counted, not the steps, those had ended, but the seconds between the sounds that followed. Because Poirot understood something Edwin did not yet grasp. Whoever was doing this understood timing, ritual, anticipation. And anticipation, Poirot knew, was the sharpest blade of all. The clock in the hall resumed its ordinary ticking. Tick, tick, tick. The house did not relax. Houses never do. Not truly. They remember what has passed through them. They hold on to echoes the way lungs hold smoke. Edwin finally whispered, barely louder than a thought. "They stopped!" Poirot did not answer at once. He raised one finger, not in warning but in instruction. "Listen." For a full minute, nothing happened. Then, very softly, came the sound of fabric brushing wood. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Not footsteps this time, a hand. Someone was touching the door. Edwin's chair creaked as he shifted, panic breaking through discipline. Poirot's gaze snapped toward him, sharp as a blade. "Do not move," Poirot whispered. The sound outside the door was patient, exploratory, as if whoever stood there was learning the surface, finding where the wood was weakest, where the hinges might betray their secrets. Poirot leaned forward slightly, angling his head. There was no breath, no sigh, no human impatience, only intention. Then 3 light taps, not knocking, testing. Edwin's lips moved soundlessly. Lydia. Poirot felt it then, the shift, the almost imperceptible change in atmosphere that told him the performance had reached its purpose. The hand withdrew, footsteps resumed, but now, Poirot noted carefully, they moved away from Lydia's door, toward Edwin's. Fear does something curious to the mind. It makes distances shorter, sounds louder, time elastic. Edwin felt the steps cross the hall in what seemed like a single heartbeat. He pressed his back against the chair, trapped between instinct and instruction, between the urge to flee and the terror of moving at all. The footsteps stopped directly outside his door. Poirot stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, simply inevitably. He crossed the sitting room with deliberate calm and positioned himself beside the door, one gloved hand hovering inches from the handle. "Remember," Poirot whispered without looking at Edwin, "fear is the invitation." The footsteps did not respond. They waited. Poirot waited longer. Then, without warning, he spoke clearly and firmly into the darkness beyond the door. "You may stop now." Silence. Poirot continued. "I know what you are doing, and I know why you have chosen this house, this hour, this noise. You believe that sound is power." He placed his hand flat against the door. "But sound," Poirot said softly, "is also evidence." The house seemed to lean in. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, very slowly, the handle turned. Only a fraction, enough to test, enough to promise. Poirot did not move, neither did the handle. And then, just as suddenly, the footsteps retreated, faster now, not panicked, but efficient. They moved down the hall, past Lydia's room, toward the stairs. Poirot opened the door. The hallway was empty, but it was no longer innocent. Poirot examined the hall as if it were a crime scene, which of course it was. He knelt beside the runner rug, fingertips hovering just above the fibers. He did not touch yet. Touching too early was a common mistake. "These footsteps," he murmured, "are not made by shoes." Edwin swallowed. "Then what?" "By weight," Poirot said. "Measured weight. The kind a person learns when they practice." He traced the faint scuffs with his eyes. "Do you see? The pressure is uneven. Deliberate, someone adjusting their balance to control sound." Edwin stared at the floor. "You mean someone is pretending?" Poirot rose slowly. "Yes," he said, "but pretending does not mean harmless." Poirot turned toward the staircase. "And now," he continued, "we discover where the performance leads." The staircase groaned under Poirot's weight in a way it had not under the footsteps, Edwin noticed. "So they didn't use the stairs?" he whispered. Poirot nodded. "Because stairs betray impatience. Corridors hide it." At the top of the stairs was a narrow landing and a door Edwin rarely opened. "The spare room," Edwin said. "No one uses it." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then tonight someone did." He opened the door. The room smelled wrong, not of dust or neglect, but of recent presence. The curtains were drawn, the bed untouched, but the window was open a crack, letting in the night air. Poirot crossed the room. On the floor near the window lay a small object. He picked it up carefully. A metronome. Edwin frowned. "A music thing?" "Yes," Poirot said. "A device for teaching rhythm." He set it on the bedside table and wound it gently. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The footsteps," he said. "Perfectly spaced, perfectly timed, like music." Edwin felt cold. "So someone rehearsed?" Poirot nodded. And rehearsals are never done, only once. They searched Lydia's room next. Poirot entered slowly, respectfully, like a man stepping into a memory. The room was neat, almost too neat. The bed made, the dresser aligned. A faint scent of lavender clung to the air. Poirot's eyes moved quickly, cataloguing. A handbag by the chair, shoes aligned by the wall, and, on the bedside table, a radio. Edwin stared. She never listened to the radio at night. Poirot picked it up. It was an old portable set, modified slightly at the back. The casing bore small scratches, marks of frequent opening. Poirot turned it over. "This," he said quietly, "is not for listening." He twisted a knob. The radio emitted a low hum, different from before, focused. "This is a transmitter," Poirot said. "Short range, private frequency." Edwin's voice shook. "She was broadcasting." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, or someone was using her too." A realization settled heavily between them. Poirot turned to Edwin. "Tell me," he said, "did your sister work with sound, music, engineering?" Edwin hesitated. "She was an assistant. At a theater, she helped with stage cues, timing, sound effects." Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Ah," he murmured. "Then she knew the power of expectation." Poirot placed the radio back down. "The broadcast," he said, "was not a warning, it was a rehearsal." Edwin stared at him. "For what?" Poirot looked toward the hallway again, toward the doors and shadows and echoes. "For the disappearance," he said. "And for the one who would follow." Edwin's face drained of color. "Me!" Poirot did not deny it. "But," Poirot added calmly, "you did not follow." Edwin swallowed. "Because of you." Poirot shook his head gently. "No," he said, "because whoever is doing this made one mistake." Edwin looked up. "What mistake?" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "They wanted you to believe the sound was inevitable," he said. "But inevitability has a pattern. And patterns," he smiled thinly, "can be broken." The house fell quiet again as the night wore on. Poirot insisted Edwin sleep in the sitting room, door open, lights low. Poirot himself remained awake, seated with his notebook, writing not words but timings. When the clock struck 1, nothing happened. At 2, silence. At 3, only the wind. Poirot closed his notebook. "Tonight," he said softly, "the performance is over." Edwin whispered, "You think they won't come back?" Poirot stood and straightened his cuffs. "Oh, they will," he said. "But not as ghosts." Edwin frowned. "Then as what?" Poirot looked toward the radio on Lydia's bedside table, now dark and harmless looking. "As a person who must explain," Poirot replied, "why they wanted someone to walk after the final chime." Chapter 4. The Signal Beneath the Silence. There is a particular kind of quiet that follows a performance, not the calm of peace, but the stillness of something waiting to see if it has been understood. That was the silence. Inside the Hargrove house when dawn crept in, the clock in the hallway marked the hour with a polite, unremarkable chime, as if ashamed of the role it had played during the night. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, softening edges, making the shadows retreat but not disappear. Shadows never truly leave. They simply change their shape. Hercule Poirot stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the street come alive. Milk bottles clinked, a delivery cart rattled past. Somewhere nearby, a door slammed with ordinary human impatience. Life had resumed. The mystery had not. Edwin Hargrove slept fitfully on the sitting-room sofa, his face drawn even in rest. Every so often his brow tightened, as though his dreams still carried footsteps. Poirot allowed him to sleep. Fear, Poirot believed, exhausted itself when given no audience. He turned back to the house. The hallway runner still lay slightly misaligned. The staircase held its usual groan. Lydia's door remained closed, not sealed, not locked, but heavy with absence. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Now we begin properly, he thought. The radio was the first thing Poirot addressed. He carried it from Lydia's room to the dining table, placing it beneath the morning light. In daylight, the device looked harmless, almost pathetic, a small portable set with worn edges, the kind sold cheaply to theater assistants and stage hands. But Poirot had learned long ago, danger often dressed itself in the ordinary. He removed the back casing carefully. Inside, the modifications were subtle but unmistakable. "This," Poirot murmured to himself, "is no toy." The transmitter coil had been reinforced, the tuning mechanism adjusted beyond standard civilian range. Whoever altered it knew precisely what they were doing and, more importantly, what they were avoiding. Poirot smiled faintly. "Someone did not wish to be traced," he said aloud. Behind him, a voice stirred. "You mean Lydia?" Edwin asked. Edwin, rubbing his eyes as he sat up. Poirot turned gently. "I mean," he corrected, "the person who taught Lydia how to use it." Edwin frowned. "She never mentioned anyone." Poirot nodded. "Of course not. You do not speak freely when someone listens, even in silence." Poirot requested paper, not stationery, plain paper. He placed it on the table and began to draw. Lines, angles, distances. Edwin watched, uneasy. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Mapping sound," Poirot replied. He marked the radio's approximate range, then overlaid the floor plan of the house, from Lydia's room, from the hall, from the spare room above. Poirot tapped the page. "The broadcast you heard," he said, "could not have reached the public station without assistance. Too weak, too controlled." Edwin leaned forward. "Then how did it—" Poirot looked up. "Someone else carried it forward," he said. "Like an echo." The word seemed to settle heavily in the room. "An accomplice?" Edwin whispered. Poirot's expression darkened, not with fear, but with clarity. "Perhaps," he said. "But more interestingly, someone positioned." Poirot folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. "We are leaving," he announced. Edwin startled. "Leaving? But what if they come back?" Poirot met his gaze calmly. "They will not return to an empty stage," he said. "And besides, if they move again, I wish to hear it from where the sound travels, not where it ends." The building that housed WXCR radio looked less mysterious by day. Red brick, clean windows, a brass plaque polished to bureaucratic pride. Poirot disliked it immediately. Inside, the station bustled with the confidence of people who believed themselves uninvolved. Poirot was shown to a small technical office where a man waited, thin, spectacled, with fingers stained faintly by ink and solder. "This is Mr. Aldous Kemp," the station manager said. "He oversees signal search." "Routing," Poirot smiled pleasantly. "Monsieur Kemp," he said, "you route ghosts." Kemp blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Poirot leaned in slightly. "Last night," Poirot continued, "your station carried a sound it claims never existed." Kemp shifted in his chair. "We've checked everything. There was no—" Poirot raised a hand. "Please," he said, "do not insult us both." He placed Lydia's radio on the desk. Kemp stared. Poirot watched him carefully. There it was, the flicker. Recognition, not of the object but of the danger it represented. "You've seen one like this before," Poirot said softly. Kemp swallowed. "They're not uncommon," Poirot nodded. "No, but this one is modified, and its frequency overlaps your auxiliary line." Kemp's fingers twitched. "That line is dead," he said too quickly. Poirot smiled thinly. "Dead things," he said, "are very often still used." Kemp broke faster than Poirot expected, not out of guilt, but out of fear. "There was a man," Kemp admitted quietly. "He came weeks ago, said he was testing historical broadcasts, old radio drama techniques, timing effects, echo delay." Poirot tilted his head. "Did he have a name?" Kemp hesitated. "He signed in as Mr. Calder." Poirot wrote it down. "And what did Mr. Calder ask for?" Poirot continued. Kemp rubbed his temples. "Access, limited, late-night routing. He said it was academic." Poirot nodded. "And you believed him?" Kemp laughed bitterly. "He knew things about sound, about fear, about how people listen differently when they think they're alone." Poirot straightened. "Did he mention a woman?" Poirot asked. "A theater assistant?" Kemp went pale. "Yes," he said. "Lydia. She brought him coffee once. He asked her questions. She thought he was brilliant." Poirot closed his notebook. "And when she became afraid?" Poirot asked quietly. Kemp looked down. "She asked me to cut the line," he whispered. "I didn't." Silence followed. Poirot stood. Fear, he said, is rarely born alone. Outside, Edwin struggled to breathe. They used her, he said. All of this to frighten her. Poirot shook his head. No, he said, to train her. Edwin stared. Train her for what? Poirot stopped walking. To disappear without noise, he said. The words struck like ice. Poirot continued, voice calm but unyielding. The footsteps were never meant to lure you, he said. They were meant to test her resolve, her timing, her obedience. Edwin's voice cracked. Then where is she? Poirot's eyes lifted toward the skyline, toward the tangle of rooftops and wires that carried sound invisibly across the city. Somewhere, Poirot said, where silence is controlled. They returned to Maraway Crescent in the afternoon. Poirot examined the spare room again. This time he noticed what he had ignored before, the window. Latch. It was not broken. It had been filed, just enough to allow quiet opening. Poirot smiled grimly. He checked beneath the bed. There, taped carefully to the slats, was a folded piece of paper. Poirot removed it. Edwin watched his face. It's hers, Edwin whispered. Poirot unfolded it. The note was brief. I'm not gone. I'm waiting for the signal to end. Poirot read it twice. Then he nodded slowly. The final chime, he murmured. Edwin looked up sharply. What? Poirot folded the note and placed it in his pocket. The chime, he said, was never a clock. Edwin stared. Poirot met his gaze. It is a command, Poirot said, and tonight someone will give it. The sun dipped low, shadows lengthened. Poirot adjusted his tie, precise as ever. Tonight, he said calmly, we stop listening. Edwin swallowed. And then, Poirot's eyes hardened with resolve. Then, he said, we answer. Chapter 5, The Hour Between Commands. There is an hour every night that belongs to no one. It is not quite yesterday, not yet tomorrow. It exists between intention and action, between the moment a command is given and the moment it is obeyed. Poirot knew this hour well. It was the hour criminals feared most. The sun had fully surrendered by the time Poirot returned to the sitting room of the Hargrove house. Lamps were lit, not brightly but deliberately, casting pools of calm against the creeping dark. Poirot disliked half-light. Ambiguity invited imagination, and imagination was the enemy of reason. Edwin sat opposite him, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had lost their color. You're certain, Edwin said, breaking the silence, that the chime will come again tonight? Poirot did not look up from his notebook. Certainty, he replied, is the refuge of fools, but probability, that is something we can work with. He closed the notebook. Whoever controls the signal, Poirot continued, has invested too much effort to stop now. Fear, mon ami, only works if it is reinforced. Edwin swallowed. And Lydia? Poirot's expression softened just slightly. Your sister is alive, he said. Of that I am nearly certain. Nearly? Poirot met his gaze. If she were dead, Poirot said, this would already be finished. Death ends leverage. The words settled heavily. Poirot rose and walked toward the hall clock. He examined it not as a timepiece, but as an instrument. Tell me, Poirot asked, who services this clock? Edwin frowned. No one. It's old. It's been here since we were children. Poirot nodded slowly. Old mechanisms, he murmured, are loyal, but they can be persuaded. He opened the casing. Inside, the gears were clean. Too clean. Poirot's eyes narrowed. This was serviced recently, he said. Edwin stared. That's impossible. Poirot turned one of the gears gently. It has been calibrated, he said. Adjusted to strike with precision. Edwin felt cold again. You mean the chime isn't natural? Poirot closed the casing. No, he said quietly. It is scheduled. They waited. The house waited too. Poirot sat not in the sitting room this time, but in the hallway itself, directly beneath the clock. Edwin protested, but Poirot silenced him with a look. If the chime is a command, Poirot said, then this is the mouth that speaks it. Edwin remained near the staircase, caught between terror and trust. The minutes crept forward. At 11:40 p.m., Poirot rose. Come, he said. They moved upstairs to the spare room. Poirot opened the window wider now. Cold air rushed in. Poirot smiled faintly. The stage is prepared, he said. He removed something from his pocket and placed it on the windowsill. A second radio, modified, tuned. Edwin's eyes widened. You built that? Poirot allowed himself a small, proud nod. I borrowed parts, he said, from people who did not know they were lending. He adjusted the dial, the radio hummed, not loudly, purposefully. This, Poirot said, will answer the signal. Edwin's breath caught. Answer how? Poirot's voice was calm. By refusing to obey. The clock struck 11:59 p.m. The house stiffened. Poirot held up one finger. Listen, the radio on the sill crackled softly. Then a voice, not distorted this time, clear, controlled. Prepare. Edwin's heart nearly stopped. Poirot leaned closer to the radio. So, Poirot murmured, you still speak, the voice continued. After the chime, movement begins. Poirot smiled thinly. You see, he whispered to Edwin, not supernatural, merely authoritarian. The clock lifted its hammer. Chime. The sound felt heavier than before, deliberate, commanding. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, footsteps, but not in the hallway. Outside, on the pavement below, Poirot's eyes flashed. They're coming, Edwin whispered. Poirot nodded. Yes, he said, to collect what they believe is ready. The footsteps stopped outside the house. A knock followed, soft, confident. Poirot did not move. The knock came again. Poirot leaned toward the radio and spoke calmly. She is not here. Silence. Then the voice returned, sharp now. You are interfering, Poirot smiled. Interference, he replied, is the essence of justice. A pause. Then the voice changed, lost its authority. Where is she? Poirot's tone hardened. Safe, he said, and no longer listening. The radio hissed violently, then cut. Downstairs a door creaked. Edwin's breath caught. Someone's inside. Poirot nodded. Yes. Footsteps again, real ones this time. Rushed. Human. Poirot descended the stairs calmly. At the base of the hall stood a man, tall, neatly dressed, his face composed, but his eyes betrayed irritation, not fear. Good evening, Poirot said politely. The man froze. You're early, Poirot added, and careless. The man's jaw tightened. You shouldn't be here, he said. Poirot smiled pleasantly. And yet, he replied, here I am. The man's gaze flicked toward the clock, Poirot noticed. You see, Poirot said softly, even now you wait for permission. The man lunged. Poirot stepped aside with surprising agility. The man stumbled, caught by his own momentum, and Edwin shouted. Poirot raised his voice, not loud, but sharp. Now! From upstairs, a sound rang out. Another chime, but this one was wrong. Offbeat, disruptive. The man froze. What did you do? He demanded. Poirot's eyes were cold. I changed the hour, he said. Sirens rose in the distance. The man sagged. You ruined it, he whispered. She was almost perfect. Poirot stepped closer. People, he said quietly, are not instruments. The police arrived moments later. The man did not resist. As he was led away, he looked once more at the clock. It did not chime. Later, much later, Edwin sat in silence. Lydia, he whispered. Poirot placed the folded note on the table. She will come home, Poirot said, when the signal ends. Edwin exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Poirot adjusted his tie. One must be very careful, he said, whom one listens to after midnight. Chapter 6. The Man Who Waited for Permission. There is a moment after danger passes, when the body remembers before the mind does. Your hands still tremble, your breath still catches, your heart keeps racing long after it has been told it may slow. Edwin Hargrove sat at the dining table, staring at the place where the intruder had stood, as though the man might reappear if he looked away. The house felt different now, exposed, almost embarrassed, like a stage after the curtain has fallen and the audience has gone home. Poirot, by contrast, was already elsewhere, not physically. Mentally, he stood by the hallway clock, examining it with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has outwitted a clever mechanism. He listened, not for footsteps, not for voices, but for habit, because habit, Poirot knew, was what remained when fear was stripped away. The man sat stiffly in the parlor, flanked by two policemen. His wrists were restrained, but his posture was immaculate. His suit was unwrinkled, his hair perfectly arranged. Only his eyes betrayed him, sharp, calculating, annoyed, not frightened, annoyed. Poirot noticed immediately. "You are disappointed," Poirot said mildly. The man looked up. "I have nothing to say to you." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but disappointment always has something to say. It merely chooses the wrong audience." The man turned his gaze away. Poirot pulled a chair close and sat, folding his hands neatly. "Tell me," Poirot said conversationally, "when did you first realize you preferred obedience to affection?" The man stiffened. Edwin looked between them, confused. Poirot continued gently, as if discussing music. "You did not want Lydia Hargrove because you loved her," Poirot said. "You wanted her because she listened, because she followed rhythm, because she waited for the signal." The man's jaw tightened. "You trained her," Poirot went on. "Not cruelly, no, far more dangerously. You rewarded precision. You punished hesitation. You made fear sound like structure." The man laughed once sharply. "You don't understand what she was capable of." Poirot's eyes hardened. "I understand perfectly," he said. "You mistook capability for ownership." Silence fell. One of the policemen shifted uncomfortably. Poirot leaned back. "You are not a murderer," Poirot said. "At least not yet. You are something more common." The man looked at him. "And what is that?" Poirot met his gaze. "A conductor who forgot that musicians are human." The man finally spoke. His name? "Calder," he said. "Julian Calder." Poirot nodded. "An alias?" Calder smiled thinly. "Everything is an alias." Poirot did not disagree. Calder's story emerged slowly, not because he resisted, but because he enjoyed control, even in confession. He had studied sound, not music, but response. How people reacted when sound arrived unexpectedly. How anticipation shaped behavior. How timing could replace force. "Fear," Calder said calmly, "is simply instruction delivered without explanation." Edwin clenched his fists. Poirot remained still. "And Lydia?" Poirot asked. Calder's eyes softened briefly. "She was extraordinary. She understood rhythm intuitively. She could move without noise, wait without panic. She learned faster than anyone." Poirot's voice cut through the admiration. "You frightened her," Calder shrugged. "I refined her." Poirot stood. "That," he said quietly, "is the difference between us." Later, when the house had emptied, when Calder had been taken away and the police had finished their questions, Poirot and Edwin stood alone in the hallway once more. The clock ticked, ordinary again. "Where is she?" Edwin asked, his voice barely holding. Poirot removed his gloves slowly. "Lydia was never meant to stay," he said. "She was meant to arrive." Edwin frowned. "I don't understand." Poirot walked to the spare room window and looked out. "Your sister," Poirot said, "was trained to leave quietly, to disappear not into darkness, but into waiting." Edwin felt his chest tighten. "Waiting where?" Poirot pointed, not to the street below, but upward. "To the old bellwether storage lofts," Poirot said. "Soundproofed rooms, former rehearsal spaces, high ceilings, places where sound is studied." Edwin's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because Calder never acted without symmetry," he said. "And because Lydia left you a note." Poirot removed the folded paper. "I'm not gone. I'm waiting for the signal to end." Poirot handed it back. "The signal has ended," he said. Edwin swallowed. "Then she'll come home." Poirot's gaze was steady. "She will come," he said, "but not as she left." Night fell again. But this time, the house did not brace itself. No lamps flickered nervously, no curtains stirred with imagined movement. The hallway held its shape without fear. Edwin sat alone at the table, the note before him. Poirot stood near the door, hat in hand. "You're leaving?" Edwin asked. Poirot nodded. "This house," he said, "must learn new silence." Edwin hesitated. "Will the footsteps come back?" Poirot considered the question carefully. "No," he said, "but you may hear them sometimes." Edwin looked down. "In my head." Poirot shook his head gently. "In memory," he said. "And memory, mon ami, is quieter when understood." Poirot opened the door. "One last thing," Edwin said quickly. Poirot turned. "How did you know," Edwin asked, "that Calder would come tonight?" Poirot smiled, not with pride, but with inevitability. "Because," he said, "men who demand obedience cannot tolerate uncertainty." Poirot stepped into the night, the door closed softly behind him, and for the first time since the broadcast, the house did not listen. It simply slept. Chapter 7, Where Silence is Taught. There are places built not for living, but for listening. Rooms where sound is absorbed, redirected, controlled. Where footsteps do not echo unless they are meant to. Where silence itself is part of the design. Hercule Poirot knew such places well, and as the motorcar carried him through the thinning night streets, he was certain of one thing. Lydia Hargrove had not been hidden. She had been stationed. The bellwether storage lofts rose from the edge of the old industrial quarter like a forgotten thought. Once a rehearsal complex for theaters and orchestras, the building had been abandoned when newer facilities arrived, leaving behind thick walls, sealed chambers, and rooms designed to swallow sound whole. Poirot stepped out of the car and paused. He listened, not to the city, but to the absence of it. Even the wind seemed hesitant here. "This," Poirot murmured, "is where obedience feels like safety." Inside, the corridors were wide and bare. Concrete floors, high ceilings, doors without markings. The air was cool and dry, carrying the faint metallic scent of old equipment and forgotten cables. Poirot moved without haste. He did not announce himself. Men like Calder trained their subjects to respond to signals. Poirot intended to arrive without one. At the far end of the corridor stood a door unlike the others, thicker, heavier, recently reinforced. Poirot placed his palm against it. No vibration, no sound. Perfect. He smiled faintly. The room beyond was large and dim, lit only by a single lamp hanging low over a table. Sound panels lined the walls in careful symmetry. The floor was padded, the windows sealed, and at the center of it all, Lydia Hargrove. She sat upright in a wooden chair, hands folded neatly in her lap, posture precise. Her eyes were open, alert but distant, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Poirot did not speak immediately. He waited, because silence, Poirot knew, could be kinder than interruption. After a long moment, Lydia's eyes shifted. They focused. "Monsieur Poirot," she said calmly. Poirot inclined his head. "Mademoiselle." She did not look surprised. "I wondered when the signal would change," she said. Poirot studied her carefully. No restraints, no signs of injury, no visible fear, only discipline. "You are safe now," Poirot said gently. Lydia nodded once. "I know." Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You do?" "Yes," she replied, "because the chime failed." Poirot smiled, just a little. They sat opposite each other, the lamp casting long shadows across the padded walls. Lydia spoke first. "He taught me how silence works," she said, "how people fill it with what they fear." Poirot listened. "He said footsteps were the most effective sound," she continued. "Not loud, not sudden, predictable, measured. They make the listener imagine the rest." Poirot nodded. "And imagination," he said softly, "is the most obedient servant of fear." Lydia looked down. "At first I thought I was learning something beautiful." Poirot did not interrupt. "He never shouted," she said, "never threatened. He just waited, and when I hesitated, he adjusted the timing, made the silence longer." Poirot's voice was quiet. "Until hesitation felt like failure." Lydia looked up at him sharply. "Yes." Poirot folded his hands. "That is not teaching," he said. "That is captivity, disguised as refinement." Lydia closed her eyes briefly. "I stayed," she said, "because I thought obedience was strength." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And now?" he asked. Lydia opened her eyes again. "Now," she said, "I hear my own footsteps." Outside, sirens wailed faintly, distant, irrelevant. Poirot rose. "It is time to leave," he said. Lydia stood with him. She moved carefully, as if relearning space. At the door, she hesitated. "What happens next?" she asked. Poirot answered without hesitation. "Next," he said, "you will be silent by choice." They walked together down the corridor. No footsteps echoed, and for the first time since the final chime, silence belonged to the right person. Chapter 8. The sound that followed them home. Some silences travel with you. They do not remain in the rooms where they were learned. They follow, quietly, patiently, waiting to see if you will listen again. Poirot knew this as the motorcar pulled away from the bellwether storage lofts. Lydia Hargrove sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap, posture still precise, but her eyes now moved, not darting, not fearful, simply aware. She watched the city pass as though relearning its rhythm. Edwin sat beside her, close enough to reassure, far enough to respect. No one spoke, and Poirot approved. The city was different at this hour, not asleep, but cautious. Streetlights hummed, pavement glistened faintly with old rain. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played music too softly to identify. Poirot broke the silence at last. "You will hear it," he said calmly. Lydia turned her head toward him. "Hear what?" Edwin asked, tension creeping back into his voice. "The after sound," Poirot replied. "It is common. When control has been removed, the mind searches for it." Lydia nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "The silence used to tell me what to do." Poirot met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "And now?" he asked. She considered this. "Now," she said carefully. "It asks questions?" Poirot smiled faintly. Marroway Crescent greeted them without ceremony. The house stood as it always had. Brick unmoved, windows dark, door closed. But Edwin felt it immediately. "It feels smaller," he said quietly. Poirot nodded. "Because it is no longer performing." Inside, Poirot insisted on one thing before anything else: the clock. He removed the front panel with meticulous care. The gears inside gleamed, recently serviced, falsely loyal. Poirot did not smash it. He adjusted it just enough. "Why not stop it entirely?" Edwin asked. Poirot shook his head. "Because silence imposed," he said, "is still control." The clock resumed ticking, slightly imperfect now, human. Lydia stood in the hallway, looking at the runner rug. She knelt, her fingers hovered above the faint scuff marks left by practiced steps. "I was taught to land here," she said softly. "And here." Poirot watched without interrupting. "They said repetition creates safety," Lydia continued, "that if I learned the pattern, fear would disappear." Poirot spoke gently. "Fear never disappears," he said. "It only changes allegiance." She looked up at him. "And whose side is it on now?" Poirot did not hesitate. "Yours," he said. Night returned, but not like before. No preparations were made, no lamps positioned defensively, no listening at doors. Poirot insisted on normality. Edwin cooked badly. Lydia smiled faintly at the familiar disaster. Poirot ate politely. When midnight approached, Edwin tensed. Poirot noticed. "You expect something," Poirot said. Edwin nodded. "I can't help it." Poirot stood. "Then let us not help it," he said. "Let us confront it." They sat together in the sitting room. No radio, no modified devices, only the clock in the hall. Tick, tick, tick. Poirot watched Lydia carefully. Her breathing remained steady. At 11:59 p.m., Edwin's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Poirot raised a hand, not to stop him, but to steady him. The clock lifted its hammer. Chime. The sound rang through the house, clear, ordinary. Nothing followed, no footsteps, no whispers, no command. Edwin exhaled sharply. Lydia did not move. Poirot waited. Then, very softly, came a sound. Not in the hallway, not on the stairs, inside Lydia's chest. A breath she did not realize she had been holding. She laughed once, quiet, disbelieving. "It didn't come," she said. Poirot nodded. "No," he said, "because it no longer has permission." Later, when Edwin had gone to bed, Lydia remained awake in the sitting room. Poirot joined her. "You will feel it again," he said without preamble, "at unexpected moments, a hallway, a hotel, a sound you cannot place." She nodded. "And if I do?" Poirot folded his hands. "Then you must do one thing." "What?" Poirot met her gaze steadily. "Make a sound of your own." She frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Poirot smiled gently. "Speak. Walk loudly. Move furniture. Hum a tune. Remind yourself that silence is not an order, it is a choice." She considered this. Then she stood, walked across the room. Her footsteps were uneven, unpracticed, human. She smiled. Poirot prepared to leave just before dawn. Edwin stood at the door. "You're certain it's over?" Edwin asked. Poirot adjusted his tie. "For you?" he said. "Yes." "And for him?" Edwin pressed. Poirot paused. "Men like Calder," he said slowly, "do not vanish easily, but without listeners they become very small." Edwin nodded. Poirot turned to Lydia. "You are not broken," Poirot said. "You were trained. Training can be undone." Lydia met his gaze. "And the silence?" she asked. Poirot opened the door. "The silence," he said, "now answers to you." As Poirot walked down Marroway Crescent, the city began to wake. Somewhere a radio played morning news. Somewhere else a clock chimed the hour, and somewhere, far away, a man waited for a signal that would never come. Chapter 9, The Last Listener. There is always one. When the crowd has dispersed, when the doors are locked, when the lights are turned off and the echoes have nowhere left to hide, there is always one listener who remains. Hercule Poirot knew this well, and on the morning after the failed chime, as the city stretched itself awake, Poirot turned his thoughts not to Lydia Hargrove, nor to Edwin, nor even to the quiet house on Marroway Crescent. He thought instead of Julian Calder. Calder sat alone in a narrow interview room at the precinct, hands folded neatly on the table, posture perfect despite the hard chair and the sleepless night. The walls were bare. The light overhead hummed faintly, an irritating, imperfect sound. Calder disliked it. It had no rhythm, no intention. A constable opened the door and stepped aside. Poirot entered without hurry. "Good morning," Poirot said pleasantly. Calder looked up and smiled. "I was wondering when you'd come." Poirot sat opposite him. "I did not wish to interrupt," Poirot replied. "You seem to be listening." Calder's smile tightened. "Listening to what?" Poirot gestured gently to the room. "To the silence," he said. "It must feel unfamiliar." Calder leaned back slightly. "Silence is neutral." Poirot shook his head. "Silence," he said, "is never neutral. It only appears so to those who expect it to obey." Calder's eyes flickered. "You know," Calder said after a moment, "she will never be the same." Poirot regarded him calmly. "Nor should she be," Poirot replied. "Sameness is the privilege of those who have never been tested." Calder laughed softly. "You think you saved her?" Poirot did not smile. "No," he said. "I think you failed to finish." The words landed harder than Calder expected. Calder leaned forward. "You don't understand what she was becoming." Poirot tilted his head. "Then explain." Calder's voice took on a strange intensity. "She was learning to move without disturbing the world," he said. "To exist without friction, to pass through spaces unnoticed. That kind of discipline." "Is not discipline," Poirot interrupted gently. "It is erasure." Calder fell silent. Poirot continued. "You taught her to wait for permission to exist," Poirot said. "And when that permission failed to arrive, you were exposed." Calder's jaw clenched. "The signal was corrupted." Poirot nodded. "Yes, by choice." Calder's voice dropped. "You interfered." Poirot leaned in slightly. "I listened," he said. "That is the difference." Calder stared at the table. "I was careful," he said. "Every sound accounted for. Every response measured." Poirot nodded again. "Yes," he said. "And yet you forgot the most important listener of all." Calder looked up. "Who?" Poirot met his gaze. "Yourself," he said. The words seemed to echo in the room. Poirot stood. "You see," Poirot continued, "you mistook control for connection. You believed that if someone followed your timing, they belonged to you." Calder said nothing. "And when they stopped," Poirot added quietly, "you had nothing left to hear." Later that day, Poirot walked alone through the city. The case was not officially closed, not yet, but its shape was complete. The truth no longer needed persuasion. People passed him without noticing. Footsteps overlapped, unrehearsed, uncontrolled, alive. Poirot paused at a café and sat by the window. A radio inside crackled faintly with afternoon programming, weather, music, a voice speaking too quickly to be important. Poirot smiled faintly. Sound restored to its proper place. At Marroway Crescent, Lydia stood in the hallway one last time. The runner rug had been removed. Bare floorboards greeted her feet. She walked the length of the hall, not carefully, not silently. Her steps rang out unevenly. She stopped at her door and opened it fully, letting light spill into the space that had once waited. Edwin watched from the stairs. "You okay?" he asked. Lydia nodded. "I'm not listening anymore," she said. That evening, as night fell gently over the city, clocks chimed across neighborhoods. Some rang early, some rang late, some were never quite right, and none of them commanded anything at all. Chapter 10. After the final chime, every mystery ends the same way, not with a revelation, but with a return to ordinary sound. Hercule Poirot understood this better than most, because the true measure of resolution was not justice delivered, nor truth revealed, but this simple question: can the world make noise again without fear? Morning arrived without ceremony, no dramatic light, no heavy silence, just the everyday sounds of a city waking, delivery carts rattling over stone, a door slamming 2 houses down, a kettle whistling somewhere unseen. Poirot stood at the corner of Marroway Crescent, listening. No footsteps followed him. That pleased him. At the Hargrove house, change had begun quietly. The hallway runner was gone for good. In its place, bare floorboards gleamed softly in the morning light. The clock still hung on the wall, but its casing remained slightly misaligned, its chime imperfect. Edwin insisted it stay that way. "I don't want it fixed," he said. Poirot approved. Perfection, he believed, was often the most dangerous sound of all. Lydia Hargrove moved through the house differently now, not cautiously, not silently, but deliberately. She opened windows without checking the street first. She walked the length of the hallway without rehearsing where her feet would land. She allowed doors to close too loudly. Each sound was a small rebellion. Poirot observed without comment. Because recovery, like silence, worked best when uninterrupted. They shared tea in the sitting room. An ordinary moment, and therefore the most important one. "You know," Edwin said hesitantly, "sometimes I still expect it." Poirot nodded. "Expectation," he said, "is the echo of fear." Lydia set her cup down. "And when it comes back?" she asked quietly. Poirot met her gaze. "Then you answer it," he said. "With what?" she asked. Poirot smiled gently. "With life." Later that afternoon, Poirot walked alone toward the station. The case file rested neatly inside his coat, not heavy, not dramatic, simply complete. He passed a radio shop. In the window, several sets played different stations at once. Voices overlapping, music colliding, advertisements shouting over weather reports. Chaos, beautiful chaos. Poirot paused, listening, sound restored to its rightful place. Somewhere else, behind locked doors and under fluorescent lights, Julian Calder sat alone. No instruments, no clocks, no signals, only silence. Unresponsive, untrained, unmoved. For the first time, it did not wait for him. And that was his sentence. As evening approached, the city prepared for night once more. Clocks would chime, radios would hum, footsteps would echo down countless hallways, but none of them would command obedience. None of them would demand fear. They would simply exist. Poirot boarded his train as twilight deepened. He took his seat, folded his hands, and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. The train whistle sounded. Unmistakable, uncontrolled, alive. Poirot smiled, because the final chime had already passed, and nothing followed it. Final old radio sign off. If you listened all the way to the end, then the silence did not defeat you. Thank you for listening to Footsteps After the Final Chime. Hercule Mysteries. Comment, the chime is over. Subscribe for more classic radio-style detective mysteries. And remember, some sounds only have power when we obey them. End broadcast.